The applause rolled across the grand hall of the Worthington Hotel as another executive stepped away from the podium holding a crystal award. Around the ballroom, nearly 400 guests filled the round tables beneath glowing chandeliers. Conversations blended with quiet music while servers moved between executives, investors, board members, and their spouses. Large screens displayed photographs celebrating another record-breaking year for Northbridge Freight Solutions. Paul Adelstein barely had a chance to sit down. Every few moments, someone stopped beside his table. Outstanding presentation in Denver. Congratulations on the new logistics contract. You've had an incredible year. Paul smiled, shook hands, and thanked each person with practiced confidence. Months of travel, endless meetings, and late nights had made him one of Northbridge's most recognized executives. Tonight was supposed to celebrate that success. Across the table, Deborah Mooney watched her husband from behind a gentle smile. She had attended enough company dinners to understand how these evenings worked. Paul would spend most of the night talking business while she quietly encouraged every conversation with a patient smile. She never complained about it. His career mattered to her because he mattered to her. She reached for her water glass while watching him laugh with another group of executives. Maybe once the awards were over, they could finally have a few uninterrupted minutes together. That was all she wanted. Not another speech, not another compliment directed toward Paul, just the drive home. It had been weeks since they had shared a peaceful conversation without someone's phone ringing or another business obligation changing their plans. Paul finally returned to his chair. "You doing okay?" he asked. Deborah smiled warmly. "I'm fine. I'm sorry I've been away so much." "You've been busy." "I know. I promise things will slow down after this quarter." She had heard similar promises before, but she nodded anyway. "I'd like that." Before either of them could continue, another executive approached. "Paul, the board chairman wants a quick word." Paul looked apologetically toward his wife. "I'll only be a minute." Deborah gave him an encouraging smile. "I'll be right here." He disappeared into the crowd once again. Deborah watched him leave, then quietly looked around the ballroom. Some couples laughed together. Others took photographs. Several longtime employees introduced their spouses to coworkers they had only heard about for years. The room carried the comfortable atmosphere of people celebrating shared success. Deborah genuinely felt happy for them. Northbridge had grown tremendously over the years. Hundreds of families depended on the company. Every new contract meant more opportunities for hard-working people across Texas. She had always believed that was worth celebrating. A few tables away, Executive Assistant Celeste Arden adjusted the microphone resting on the stage. She exchanged a few words with the Master of Ceremonies before glancing toward the audience. Her eyes paused briefly on Deborah. Then she smiled. The Master of Ceremonies stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our final recognition awards, we thought we'd have a little fun." Light laughter spread through the ballroom. "Our executive support team has collected a few stories from behind the scenes that remind us even successful leaders are still human." More laughter followed. "Please welcome Ms. Celeste Arden." Polite applause filled the room. Celeste walked confidently onto the stage wearing a tailored navy evening dress that perfectly matched her composed personality. She thanked the audience before beginning with harmless stories about delayed flights, forgotten hotel reservations, coffee orders that changed 3 times before breakfast, and executives who accidentally scheduled 2 meetings at the same hour. The room laughed often. Even Paul chuckled while standing beside another group of senior managers. Deborah relaxed. The evening had returned to normal. Celeste smiled as another joke landed successfully. "I've learned something after working with executives for several years." She paused just long enough for the room to settle. Success doesn't only change the people earning promotions. Several guests nodded. It changes everyone standing beside them. A few people laughed softly. Celeste slowly turned toward Deborah's table. "Mrs. Adelstein." The ballroom became noticeably quieter. Deborah looked up, surprised that she had been addressed directly. Celeste smiled as though she were about to include her in the joke. "I've always wanted to ask you something." Every nearby conversation stopped. Paul turned toward the stage. "So tell me." Celeste lifted the microphone a little higher. "How does it feel watching your husband become successful while you stayed behind?" Silence swept across the ballroom. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others looked toward Deborah before immediately looking away. Celeste continued before anyone could react. Doesn't it ever bother you, knowing everyone in this room sees him as the one who built this life? A few uneasy laughs escaped from different corners of the ballroom. Most people didn't laugh at all. Instead, they looked toward Paul. Every person expected the same thing. One sentence, one defense, one husband standing beside his wife. Deborah slowly turned toward Paul. She wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She simply waited. Paul's face tightened. He glanced around the room, suddenly aware that hundreds of people were watching him. For a brief moment, it seemed he was about to speak. Instead, he forced an uncomfortable smile. Let's move on. The words landed harder than the insult itself. Deborah lowered her eyes for a single second, not because Celeste had questioned her, because the man she had spent 16 years standing beside had chosen silence when she needed him most. She placed both hands calmly on the edge of the table. Then she stood. The ballroom became completely still. Welcome to Will and Rye's stories. To every single person listening right now, thank you for being here. This channel is growing because of people like you who truly love emotional, unforgettable storytelling. Please support the channel by subscribing. 16 years before anyone inside that ballroom questioned Deborah Mooney, she and Paul Adelstein were simply a young married couple trying to build a good life. They didn't begin with wealth. They didn't begin with important titles. They began with trust. Their first apartment was small. The living room was barely large enough for a couch, a coffee table, and a tiny television they bought secondhand. The kitchen had old cabinets that squeaked every time they opened. During heavy rain, water leaked near one window, and they kept an old bucket nearby because repairing it cost more than they could afford. They laughed through those years. When payday arrived, they celebrated with pizza because restaurants were too expensive. When one appliance broke, they fixed it together instead of replacing it. Neither complained. Both believed they were building something that mattered. Paul worked long hours even then, hoping every promotion would create a better future. Deborah believed in him without hesitation. Whenever he doubted himself, she reminded him why he had started. Whenever work became difficult, she listened without judging him. They solved every problem together. A few years later, their daughter Beth was born. Everything changed. The apartment suddenly felt too small. Sleep became rare. Money became tighter. Still, they never argued about who carried the heavier responsibility. If Beth cried during the night, they both woke up. If Paul returned home exhausted, Deborah made sure dinner was waiting. If Deborah became overwhelmed caring for a newborn, Paul took over whenever he could. Neither kept score. They simply helped each other. 2 years later, Brad joined the family. Their little apartment could no longer hold 4 people comfortably. Soon afterward, Paul accepted a management position at Northbridge Freight Solutions. The promotion came with more responsibility, but it also gave them enough income to buy their first home in a quiet neighborhood outside Dallas. It wasn't the biggest house on the street. It didn't need to be. It had a wide front porch where the children later learned to ride their bicycles. A backyard where Brad practiced baseball almost every afternoon. A dining room where birthdays, holidays, and ordinary family dinners created memories that mattered far more than expensive furniture. Deborah loved that house because it always felt alive. Every morning she woke before everyone else. She prepared breakfast, packed school lunches, checked the family calendar, made sure nothing important was forgotten. She never considered those responsibilities small. She believed families stayed strong through ordinary routines repeated with love. By the time Beth and Brad came downstairs each morning, breakfast was already waiting. Their lunches sat neatly beside their backpacks. Their mother greeted them with the same warm smile every day. Beth naturally noticed small details. She rarely rushed through anything. Brad brought energy wherever he went. One morning he walked into the kitchen carrying his baseball glove before sunrise. "Mom, Coach says if I keep practicing, I might become starting pitcher." Deborah smiled while placing pancakes onto his plate. "Then keep practicing." "I will." Beth looked up from her cereal. "You'll have to do homework too." Brad laughed. "I know." Their mornings always began like that. Simple conversations, small laughter, ordinary happiness. Those moments became the foundation of their family. Paul loved those mornings too. At least he used to. Years earlier, he rarely missed breakfast. He sat at the table drinking coffee while reading the newspaper. He drove the children to school whenever his schedule allowed. On weekends, he attended every baseball practice, every school event, every birthday party, every science fair. His family never wondered whether he would come. They expected him because he always did. Deborah often watched him playing catch with Brad in the backyard, while Beth explained another science project from the porch. Those ordinary evenings became her favorite memories. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive, just her family together. Slowly, life changed. Paul received another promotion. More meetings filled his calendar. Business trips became more frequent. Clients called during dinner. Weekends became work days. At first, everyone accepted it. "It won't always be this busy," Paul often said. Deborah believed him. She always believed him. Whenever he missed dinner, she wrapped his meal and placed it inside the refrigerator. Whenever he returned home after midnight, she left handwritten notes reminding him that the children loved him and breakfast would be ready in the morning. She never complained. She simply adjusted. The children adjusted too. Beth stopped asking whether her father would attend every school event. Instead, she asked whether he might come. Brad stopped running to the front window every afternoon. Instead, he quietly asked his mother if Dad was traveling again. Deborah always answered kindly, "He's working hard for all of us." She believed those words. Paul believed them too. Neither noticed what was quietly happening inside their home. The missed dinners became normal. The canceled family plans became expected. The empty chair at the dining table no longer surprised anyone. Without realizing it, every member of the family began arranging life around Paul's schedule instead of sharing life with him. No one blamed him. No one accused him of choosing work over family. They simply accepted each new change one day at a time. That was why the distance became so difficult to notice. Nothing collapsed overnight. There was no single argument that changed everything, no dramatic moment that pushed them apart. The distance grew through ordinary days. One missed dinner, one postponed conversation, one forgotten promise. Then another, then another. Paul still loved his wife. Deborah still loved her husband. Beth still admired her father. Brad still waited for every chance to play baseball with him. The love inside the family never disappeared. Their time together did. None of them realized how much they were losing because every sacrifice looked temporary. Every missed moment came with the same promise. Things will get better after this promotion. Each time Paul said those words, he believed them completely. Each time Deborah smiled and said she understood. Neither of them knew that those small choices were quietly carrying their family toward the hardest season they had ever faced. Paul's promotion at Northbridge Freight Solutions changed more than his job title. It changed his routine. His days started before sunrise. Most mornings, he left the house while everyone else was still asleep. Deborah often found a short note beside the coffee maker. "Early meeting. Don't wait for me tonight." She folded every note and placed it inside the same kitchen drawer. She never mentioned them. She simply continued with her day. By 5:30 every morning, she was already awake. Breakfast came first, then school lunches, then checking Beth's assignments and Brad's baseball schedule. By the time the children reached the kitchen, everything was ready. Brad looked toward the empty chair. "Dad already left?" Deborah nodded. "He had an early meeting." Brad sighed. "Again? He'll make it up to you." Brad smiled, trying to believe it. "I hope so." After taking the children to school, Deborah drove to the community learning center where she volunteered twice every week. She taught families how to budget, save money, and recover from debt. She never made anyone feel embarrassed. She explained every lesson in simple language. People left her classroom feeling hopeful. One afternoon, an older woman hugged her after class. "I paid off my last credit card." Deborah smiled. "You earned that victory. You helped me believe I could." Deborah thanked her and watched her leave. Helping people had always brought her joy. Years earlier, she had earned her MBA with honors. Several companies wanted to hire her. She loved finance. She enjoyed solving business problems. Everything changed after Beth was born. When Paul accepted greater responsibilities at Northbridge, one of them needed flexibility at home. Deborah chose her family without regret. She never considered it a sacrifice. She considered it an investment. Across town, Paul entered another executive meeting. His calendar stayed full. Morning strategy sessions, client presentations, budget reviews, conference calls, business travel. Every hour belonged to someone. His executive assistant, Celeste Arden, stayed one step ahead of every schedule. She organized meetings before anyone asked. She rearranged flights. She answered calls. She protected Paul's calendar so carefully that very few personal interruptions reached him. One morning she entered his office carrying a folder. "You have meetings until 6. Paul accepted the schedule. "Anything important?" "You missed 2 personal calls." "From who?" "Your wife." Paul looked briefly at his phone. "Did she leave a message?" "No." He placed the phone back on his desk. "It can wait." Celeste nodded. "I'll let everyone know you're unavailable." Within seconds, she moved on to the next appointment. Neither of them thought much about the conversation. Deborah had only called to remind Paul about Beth's STEM showcase that afternoon. Beth spent weeks designing a bridge for the competition. She hoped both parents would be there. When the event began, Deborah sat proudly in the front row. Beth carried her project onto the stage. Before the judges announced the winners, she looked toward the entrance. One seat remained empty. Her father's. She looked again. He never came. Beth earned second place. Parents applauded. Deborah hugged her daughter tightly. "You did an amazing job." Beth smiled politely. "I wanted Dad to see it. He'll be proud when I tell him." Beth lowered her eyes. "I wanted him to tell me himself." Deborah had no answer. That evening, Paul finally arrived home after 9. He found Beth already asleep. Her certificate rested on the dining table. He picked it up. For several seconds, he stared at it without speaking. He quietly carried it upstairs and placed it beside her bed. The next morning, he promised himself he would attend the next family event. He meant every word. A few days later, another client requested an emergency meeting. Another business trip appeared. Another promise disappeared. Brad noticed the changes too. Saturday baseball games had always been special. Paul never missed them before. Now the empty seat beside Deborah became familiar. Brad searched the bleachers during warm-ups. "Is Dad coming?" Deborah checked her phone. "He's trying." Brad nodded. Every inning, he looked toward the entrance. The seat never filled. After the game, he walked quietly beside his mother. "I struck out twice. You kept trying. I wanted Dad to see me hit. He'll come next time." Brad smiled weakly. "Okay." That evening, Marcus Holloway called Paul. "You missed another game." "I couldn't leave the office." "You've said that before." "I'm building something important." Marcus answered calmly. "So is your family." Paul stayed quiet. Marcus continued. "Titles don't remember birthdays. They don't remember ball games. They don't remember school events. Your children will." Paul looked through the window of his hotel room. "I'll make time." "I hope you do." The call ended. Paul stood there thinking about those words. He loved his family. He never questioned that. He simply believed every missed moment was temporary. One more promotion, one more contract, one more successful year. Then everything would become easier. He didn't notice that each promotion demanded even more from him. Back at home, Deborah served dinner. Paul's chair remained empty. Brad asked fewer questions now. Beth stopped checking the clock. Deborah wrapped another untouched plate and placed it inside the refrigerator. The routine had become familiar. She still believed her husband wanted to be there. She also knew wanting and showing up were no longer the same thing. Without realizing it, Paul had become dependable at work and unavailable at home. The people inside Northbridge saw a rising executive. The people inside his house simply missed their husband and father. Paul still believed he was building a better future. He never realized the future he wanted was slowly taking away the present his family needed most. Long before Paul Adelstein became one of Northbridge Freight Solutions' senior executives, the company came dangerously close to shutting its doors. 16 years earlier, Northbridge was losing money every month. Several major contracts had been canceled. Banks refused to extend more credit. Suppliers demanded payment before delivering equipment. Employees worried every payday might be their last. Inside the company, people believed bankruptcy was only weeks away. Founder Sterling Wren refused to give up. He spent every day searching for someone willing to invest enough money to save the business. Meeting after meeting ended the same way. Investors wanted control. Others wanted to break the company apart and sell its assets. Sterling rejected every offer. He believed Northbridge could recover if someone believed in its people instead of its problems. One afternoon, he received a call from an investment representative asking for a private meeting. The representative never revealed the investor's identity. Only one condition was given. The investor wanted complete confidentiality. Sterling accepted. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. The representative arrived with financial reports, legal documents, and a detailed recovery plan. Every page showed a complete understanding of Northbridge's business. The proposal wasn't based on hope. It was based on facts. Costs would be reduced without laying off loyal employees. Debt would be restructured. Operations would be modernized. Management would become accountable for every major financial decision. When Sterling finished reading the proposal, he looked across the table. "I've spoken with dozens of investors. This is the first plan that actually protects my employees." The representative smiled. "My client believes a company succeeds because of its people." Sterling signed the agreement. Within weeks, Northbridge received the investment it desperately needed. Employees kept their jobs. Operations stabilized. Customers slowly returned. Year after year, the company recovered. Very few people ever learned where the investment came from. The ownership remained hidden through a private holding company. Only a handful of trusted legal professionals knew the investor's identity. That decision came from one person, Deborah Mooney. Before marrying Paul, Deborah's late father had spent decades building a successful investment business. Rather than leaving luxury for his daughter, he left responsibility. He taught her to study every business carefully before risking a single dollar. He often told her, "Money should build people, not control them." Those words stayed with her. After earning her MBA, Deborah became known for her ability to analyze struggling businesses. She understood finance. She understood leadership. Most importantly, she understood people. When Northbridge faced collapse, she quietly reviewed every financial statement she could legally obtain. She noticed something many investors ignored. The company still had strong employees. Its customers still believed in its service. Its biggest problem was poor financial management, not lack of opportunity. She believed Northbridge deserved another chance. Using her family holding company, she approved the investment. She never asked for public recognition. She never asked for a seat in the spotlight. She asked for one thing: her identity would remain confidential. Sterling respected that decision. Years later, when Paul joined Northbridge, Deborah never told anyone about her connection to the company, not even her husband. She wanted him to succeed through his own hard work. She never wanted people whispering that promotions came because of his wife. She wanted every achievement to belong entirely to him. When Paul earned his first promotion, Deborah celebrated. When he became a department manager, she celebrated again. When he entered senior leadership, she felt proud watching him earn the respect of his colleagues. Every promotion confirmed she had made the right decision. She protected his reputation by protecting her secret. Even after Northbridge became profitable again, Deborah never changed her mind. Every shareholder meeting was attended through legal representatives. Every vote was submitted through the holding company. Every major decision followed corporate governance procedures. Her name remained absent from company conversations. Only Sterling Wren, Corinne Vale, Malcolm Rourke, and a few legal professionals knew who truly held the controlling shares. Paul never suspected anything. Whenever he spoke proudly about Northbridge at home, Deborah listened with genuine happiness. She enjoyed hearing him describe new projects, expanding operations, and successful contracts. Sometimes he asked her opinion. She always answered carefully, "What do you think about this expansion?" "I think long-term stability matters more than quick profits." He smiled. You always see things differently." She laughed softly. "That's why you ask." Paul assumed she was simply offering thoughtful advice. He never realized she understood every major decision because she had helped protect the company's future from the very beginning. As Northbridge continued growing, Deborah quietly watched something else change. Employees who once valued teamwork slowly became more interested in titles. Some managers began measuring success only by numbers. Complaints that once received immediate attention started taking longer to resolve. Small problems became easier to ignore. Deborah noticed the shift long before most people did. She never interfered with daily operations. She believed executives should lead the company without hidden influence from ownership. But she also believed every leader should remain accountable. Months before the Leadership Appreciation Dinner, she privately authorized an independent governance review through the board. She gave only one instruction: follow the facts. Protect the employees. Treat everyone fairly. She never asked anyone to protect her husband. She never asked anyone to target him. She wanted the truth, wherever it led. After approving the review, she returned to her normal life. She prepared breakfast. She volunteered at the community learning center. She attended Brad's baseball games. She encouraged Beth before every school event. No one looking at Deborah Mooney would have guessed she quietly held the future of Northbridge in her hands. She preferred it that way. To the world, she was simply Paul Adelstein's supportive wife. Only a few people knew she had been protecting both the company and her husband's reputation for 16 years. Neither of them realized that those two worlds were about to meet on one unforgettable night. Northbridge Freight Solutions continued growing. New contracts arrived almost every month. The board praised the leadership team. Investors celebrated rising profits. Inside the company, everything looked successful. Inside the offices, another story was beginning to develop. Employees started sending concerns to human resources. Some complained about delayed reimbursements. Others questioned purchasing decisions that no one could clearly explain. Several supervisors reported that department managers were approving vendors without following company policy. At first, each complaint looked small. No single report seemed serious enough to demand immediate attention. Human Resources forwarded the reports to senior management. Most eventually reached Paul's office. He reviewed the first few files. "They're minor," he said. "We'll handle them after the quarterly review." The files were placed aside. More reports arrived the following week, then more the week after. Every report pointed toward the same departments. Several mentioned Gideon Price. Others mentioned Executive Assistant Celeste Arden. Neither complaint accused them of stealing. Instead, employees described a growing culture where questions were discouraged. People who challenged decisions found themselves excluded from important meetings. Suggestions disappeared without explanation. Some employees quietly stopped speaking up altogether. Paul believed the situation could wait. His attention stayed fixed on expanding Northbridge's business. A national client was negotiating a transportation contract worth millions of dollars. Winning that agreement became his highest priority. Every day brought another meeting, another presentation, another conference call. Every hour was committed. One afternoon, Celeste entered Paul's office carrying a stack of folders. "You have 20 minutes before your airport driver arrives." Paul signed several documents. What else? Human Resources sent additional employee concerns. Paul looked briefly at the folders. "Anything urgent?" "Mostly repeated complaints." Paul nodded. "Schedule time for next month." "I'll take care of it." Celeste removed the folders from his desk. The complaints remained unresolved. Across another floor of the building, Gideon Price met with department supervisors. "We're behind schedule," he said. "I don't want excuses." One supervisor raised a concern. "The purchasing process isn't matching company policy." Gideon looked directly at him. "We're meeting deadlines. The paperwork can catch up later." Another supervisor spoke carefully. "Some employees are uncomfortable signing documents after approvals." Gideon's expression hardened. "If you don't trust management, you're free to work somewhere else." The room became quiet. The meeting ended minutes later. Several employees walked away frustrated. One quietly submitted another complaint before leaving for the day. By the end of the month, Human resources had collected far more reports than usual. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Corinne Vale reviewed a summary prepared for the board. She noticed the same names appearing repeatedly: Gideon Price, Celeste Arden, multiple departments, similar concerns. She requested supporting documents. Corporate counsel Malcolm Rourke examined them carefully. The complaints are consistent. Corinne asked one question: has anyone investigated them? Not completely. Why? Senior management keeps postponing a formal review. Corinne closed the folder. That cannot continue. Without announcing anything publicly, she informed Sterling Wren about the growing pattern. Sterling studied every page. He had spent decades building Northbridge. He knew successful companies failed when leaders ignored small problems because business looked good from the outside. We deal with facts, he said. Nothing else. Corinne agreed. No assumptions. No rumors. Only evidence. Sterling nodded. Begin gathering it. Neither of them informed the executive team. They wanted the review to remain independent. Meanwhile, Paul continued believing he was protecting the company by focusing on growth. He never intended to ignore employees. He simply convinced himself that larger business challenges deserved immediate attention. He believed internal concerns could wait. He did not realize that every week of delay gave those concerns more time to grow. Across the company, employees noticed something else. When concerns involved ordinary supervisors, management responded quickly. When concerns involved senior leadership, nothing seemed to happen. Confidence slowly began to change. Some employees stopped filing reports. Others kept detailed records instead. Deborah knew none of these daily conversations. She remained at home, believing Paul was carrying the weight of an expanding company. Paul believed he was doing exactly what a responsible executive should do. Neither of them realized that decisions being delayed inside Northbridge were quietly moving both the company and their family toward the same defining moment that awaited them at the Leadership Appreciation Dinner. As Northbridge continued expanding, Paul's calendar became busier than ever. Some weeks, he spent more nights in hotels than at home. Every trip came with the same promise: I'll make it up when I get back. Deborah always smiled. We'll be here. She never argued. She understood the demands of leadership. She only hoped those demands would not last forever. One Friday afternoon, Beth walked into the kitchen carrying an invitation. Mom, our school banquet is next Thursday. Deborah looked at the card. Outstanding student recognition. She smiled proudly. You earned this. Beth nodded. They said parents should attend. Deborah looked at her. Your father will be there. Beth smiled. I hope so. That evening, Deborah placed the invitation beside Paul's dinner plate. When he arrived home, he picked it up. Our daughter did this? She worked very hard. Paul smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Beth overheard him from the hallway. For the first time in weeks, excitement filled her face. She believed him. 3 days later, Paul received another call from a major client. The meeting conflicted with the school banquet. He stared at both appointments on his calendar. Celeste entered his office. The client can only meet Thursday. Paul rubbed his forehead. I promised Beth. The contract is worth millions. Paul looked at the invitation lying on his desk. After several seconds, he quietly handed it to Celeste. Move everything else around. The banquet? Paul lowered his eyes. I won't make it. That evening, he called home. Deborah answered. Hi. I'm sorry. She already understood. You can't come. The client changed the schedule. I know. Please tell Beth. I will. When Beth heard the news, she forced a smile. It's okay. Deborah gently held her hand. You don't have to pretend. Beth looked toward the window. He always says next time. The banquet arrived. Deborah applauded as Beth received her award. Parents stood proudly beside their children for photographs. Beth stood beside her mother. The space beside them remained empty. Later that night, Paul called from another city. How did it go? You should ask Beth. I will. He called her immediately. You won? Yes. I'm proud of you. Oh, thank you. Her voice remained polite. The excitement he expected was missing. The conversation ended after only a few minutes. Paul stared at his phone. He knew something had changed. A month later, another important date arrived. Their 16th wedding anniversary. Deborah never expected expensive gifts. She only wanted one evening together. She cooked Paul's favorite meal. She lit a few candles on the dining table. Beth smiled. "Dad's going to like this." Brad nodded. "We're leaving after dinner, so you two can celebrate." Deborah laughed. "Thank you." She checked the clock. 6 o'clock, then 7. At 8, her phone rang. Paul sounded exhausted. "I'm sorry. The flight was delayed. I won't make it tonight." Deborah closed her eyes briefly. "I understand. I'll take you out this weekend. Travel safely." She ended the call before her voice changed. Beth quietly blew out the candles. Brad helped carry the food into the kitchen. No one complained. The celebration simply disappeared. Late that night, Paul arrived home. The house was dark. He noticed the anniversary card still resting on the dining table. He opened it. Inside, Deborah had written only one sentence. "Thank you for 16 years together." Nothing else. No anger. No accusations. He looked around the empty dining room. For the first time, he realized how many family moments had slipped away. The following morning, he apologized. "I'm sorry." Deborah smiled gently. "I know you are. I'll make it right. I believe you." She meant those words. She had never stopped believing in her husband. She simply wished life would finally give him time to keep his promises. Weeks passed. Business travel continued. Family routines continued. Beth became more independent. She stopped asking whether her father would attend events. She simply thanked her mother for always being there. Brad also changed. Instead of waiting for his father after every baseball practice, he stayed longer with teammates before going home. He still loved his father. He simply stopped expecting him. Deborah noticed both changes. She never criticized Paul in front of the children. Whenever they asked why he was away, her answer stayed the same. "Your father loves this family." That was true. She never wanted her children to doubt it. One Sunday afternoon, Paul surprised everyone by arriving home early. Brad ran outside carrying his baseball glove. "Dad, want to play?" Paul smiled. "Absolutely." For nearly an hour, they played catch in the backyard. Beth sat on the porch reading while Deborah watched from the garden. For a little while, everything felt normal again. When they finished, Paul's phone rang. He looked at the screen. "It's work." Brad's smile faded. "Do you have to answer?" Paul hesitated. "It's important." He stepped away to take the call. 10 minutes became 20, then 30. By the time he returned, Brad had gone inside. The baseball glove remained on the grass. Paul picked it up slowly. He walked into the house carrying it. He found Brad watching television with little interest. "I'm sorry." Brad looked up. "It's okay." Paul knew it wasn't. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Deborah found Paul sitting alone at the kitchen table. "You've been quiet. I keep thinking I'm doing this for all of you." Deborah sat beside him. "I know, but sometimes being here matters more than working for us." Paul nodded. "I'll do better." He believed those words. So did Deborah. Neither of them knew that time was already running out before everything they believed about their marriage, their family, and Northbridge would be tested in front of the entire company. As summer came to an end, excitement spread across Northbridge Freight Solutions. The annual Leadership Appreciation Dinner was only 3 weeks away. Employees looked forward to it every year. It was the company's biggest celebration. Awards would be presented. Major achievements would be recognized. Executives would attend with their families. The board would also be present. Throughout the headquarters, conversations centered on the upcoming event. Paul expected another busy season. His department had delivered excellent results, and several board members had congratulated him for helping secure important contracts. He assumed the evening would celebrate another successful year. He had no reason to think otherwise. One Monday morning, Celeste Arden entered his office carrying a folder. "I've been asked to coordinate the dinner program." Paul smiled. "You'll do a great job." I want this year's event to be memorable. I'm sure it will be. She opened the folder. We'll have awards, employee recognition, a short entertainment segment, and a few lighthearted moments before the closing speeches. Paul nodded. People enjoy those. I've already started collecting funny stories about senior leadership. Paul laughed. Just don't embarrass me too much. Celeste smiled. I'll be careful. As she left the office, she felt confident. She enjoyed being trusted with important company events. Over the following days, she visited different departments collecting stories. Employees shared harmless moments, missed flights, funny meeting mistakes, coffee spilled during presentations. Everyone expected another evening filled with laughter. Meanwhile, preparations of another kind were quietly taking place. Inside the boardroom, Corinne Vale met with Sterling Wren and Malcolm Rourke. A thick collection of documents rested on the conference table. Every page came from the independent governance review authorized months earlier. Malcolm organized the files carefully. We've completed the interviews. Corinne looked at him. Any conclusions? We have documented evidence. No assumptions. Everything has been verified. Sterling slowly reviewed the reports. The board deserves the complete truth. Corinne nodded. So do the employees. Malcolm closed the final folder. The timing is important. Sterling looked toward both of them. We will follow the agenda as planned. No public discussion until every fact has been presented to the board. Both agreed. The meeting ended. Outside the boardroom, nothing appeared unusual. Employees continued preparing for the celebration. No one suspected another meeting was already scheduled before the dinner began. Back at home, Deborah noticed the invitation lying on the kitchen counter. Northbridge Freight Solutions. Leadership Appreciation. Dinner. She picked it up and smiled. Paul walked into the kitchen. It finally arrived. Deborah looked at him. You've worked hard this year. We all have. Are you looking forward to it? Paul nodded. I think it'll be a nice evening. Deborah smiled. It's been a long time since we've gone somewhere together. Paul looked at her. After the dinner, let's leave early. She laughed softly. Really? I mean it. No meetings. No phone calls. Just us. She believed him. I'd like that. Over the next week, Beth helped her mother choose a dress. You should wear the blue one. Deborah smiled. You always liked that dress. It looks beautiful on you. Brad walked into the room. I think Dad will wear his gray suit. Deborah laughed. He probably will. The children enjoyed seeing their parents prepare for an evening together. It reminded them of earlier years. At Northbridge, Paul became even busier. Final reports needed approval before the celebration. Client meetings filled his afternoons. Travel plans changed almost daily. Celeste handled every adjustment. She protected his schedule from interruption. Whenever someone requested a personal meeting with Paul, she often replied, "He's completely booked." Paul appreciated her efficiency. He never realized how much control she had gained over access to his time. 2 days before the dinner, Corinne received one final report from Malcolm. She read every page carefully. When she finished, she called Sterling. It's complete. Sterling asked only one question. Are you confident? Every document has been verified. Every interview has been reviewed. There are no unanswered questions. Sterling answered calmly. Then we're ready. That same afternoon, Deborah received a brief phone call from Corinne. Everything is prepared. Deborah understood immediately. Thank you. We'll see you at the dinner. The call lasted less than a minute. Neither woman discussed details. Everything that needed to be done had already been completed. Deborah placed her phone down and continued preparing dinner for her family. She never looked anxious. She never celebrated. She simply continued living her ordinary life. Paul arrived home later that evening. I'm sorry I'm late. Deborah smiled. You made it. They ate dinner together with Beth and Brad. The conversation stayed light. Brad talked about baseball. Beth shared plans for school. For the first time in weeks, Paul stayed at the table until everyone finished eating. When dinner ended, Brad smiled. This was nice. Paul looked at his son. "We should do it more often." Brad nodded. "I'd like that." The evening ended quietly. Everyone believed the Leadership Appreciation Dinner would simply recognize another successful year. Paul expected awards. Celeste expected applause for organizing the event. Employees expected laughter. Only Deborah, Sterling, Corinne, and Malcolm knew the dinner would become the most important night in Northbridge's history. Within a few days, every hidden truth would come into the open, and the lives of everyone connected to the company would change forever. The evening of the Leadership Appreciation Dinner finally arrived. Paul and Deborah arrived together at the Worthington Hotel just before 6 o'clock. Employees welcomed them with warm smiles as they entered the ballroom. The room was full. Executives greeted one another. Board members spoke with investors. Families gathered for photographs before dinner began. Paul shook hands almost immediately. "Congratulations on another great year. You've earned tonight. Outstanding work." Paul thanked everyone politely. Deborah stayed beside him, smiling as she had done for years. She never tried to join business conversations. She was simply happy watching her husband enjoy the success he had worked hard to achieve. After dinner, the award presentations began. Several employees received recognition for years of service. Departments celebrated new achievements. The audience applauded throughout the program. Paul received an award for helping secure one of the company's largest transportation contracts. The ballroom stood to applaud him. He thanked his team. He thanked Northbridge. He thanked the board. Then he returned to his seat beside Deborah. She leaned toward him. "I'm proud of you." Paul smiled. "Thank you." For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. Back at home, Beth and Brad sat together in the living room. The company live stream played on the television. Brad smiled. Dad looked nervous. Beth laughed. "He always does before speeches." "I'm glad Mom went with him." "So am I." Neither child expected the evening to become unforgettable. Back inside the ballroom, the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. "We've reached everyone's favorite part of the evening." Light laughter filled the room. Our executive support team has collected a few memorable stories from the past year. More laughter followed. "Please welcome Celeste Arden." Applause echoed across the ballroom. Celeste walked confidently onto the stage. She thanked everyone before beginning. Her first story involved an executive boarding the wrong flight. The audience laughed. Her second story described a meeting interrupted by someone's phone ringtone. The room laughed again. She continued with several harmless moments involving senior leadership. Every joke received warm applause. Paul relaxed. Deborah smiled politely. Then Celeste looked toward their table. "Before I finish," she smiled, "I've always wanted to ask someone here a question." Several guests looked around the room. Celeste raised her microphone. "Mrs. Adelstein." Deborah looked toward the stage. "Would you mind standing for just a moment?" The audience turned toward her. Deborah stood with a polite smile. Celeste continued, "I've always admired supportive spouses." Several people nodded. "They sacrifice a lot." More guests smiled. Then Celeste asked, "How does it feel watching your husband become successful while you stayed behind?" The smiles disappeared. No one laughed. Deborah continued looking at Celeste. She remained calm. Celeste spoke again before anyone answered. "Doesn't it bother you that everyone here knows Paul built this wonderful life?" A few uneasy laughs came from different tables. Most people remained silent. Many executives immediately turned toward Paul. They expected him to answer. They expected him to defend his wife. Paul looked at Deborah. Then he looked across the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes waited for his response. He forced a small smile. "Let's move on." The words reached every corner of the ballroom. Several guests lowered their heads. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks. No one expected that answer. Back at home, Beth stared at the television. "Did Dad really say that?" Brad looked confused. "He didn't defend Mom." Beth picked up the remote but could not bring herself to change the channel. She wanted to believe something else would happen. Inside the ballroom, Deborah remained standing. She showed no anger. She showed no embarrassment. She looked first at Paul. Then she looked toward Celeste. Finally, she turned toward the head table where Sterling Wren, Corinne Vale, and Malcolm Rourke were seated. She spoke calmly. "Thank you for asking your question." The room became completely focused on her. "It deserves an honest answer." She turned toward Sterling. "May I have a few minutes?" Sterling stood immediately. His answer came without hesitation. "You have never needed permission." Confusion spread across the ballroom. Paul frowned. He looked from Sterling to Deborah. He did not understand what was happening. Celeste's confident smile began to fade. Corinne stood. Malcolm picked up a large leather portfolio resting beside his chair. Together, they walked toward the stage. No one applauded. No one spoke. Every person inside the ballroom watched them. Paul's heart began beating faster. He had attended company dinners for years. Nothing like this had ever happened. He looked at Deborah again. For the first time that evening, he realized his wife was not surprised. She calmly walked toward the stage as if she already knew exactly what was about to happen. Deborah walked onto the stage without rushing. She accepted the microphone and looked across the ballroom. No one looked away. She spoke calmly. "Thank you for allowing me to answer." She turned toward Celeste. "You asked how it feels watching my husband become successful while I stayed behind. I appreciate your honesty." Celeste tried to smile. "I didn't mean to offend you." Deborah answered politely. "I believe you asked what many people have quietly assumed." She turned toward Sterling Wren. "Mr. Wren, would you please continue?" Sterling walked onto the stage beside her. He looked around the ballroom before speaking. "For many years, Northbridge Freight Solutions has protected one confidential agreement. Tonight, that agreement can no longer remain private." The room became completely still. Paul stared at Sterling. He had never heard him speak with such seriousness during a company celebration. Sterling continued. 16 years ago, this company was close to closing. We were losing contracts. Our finances were failing. I met with dozens of investors. Most wanted control. Others wanted to sell the company. I refused every offer." He turned toward Deborah. "One investor believed our employees deserved another chance. That investor saved Northbridge." Several guests looked at one another. Many had never heard that part of the company's history. Sterling continued. "The investment came with one condition. The investor's identity would remain confidential. For 16 years, we honored that agreement." He smiled respectfully toward Deborah. "Tonight, she has given us permission to tell the truth." Every eye moved toward Deborah. Paul felt his heart racing. Sterling spoke clearly. "The investor who saved Northbridge Freight Solutions is Deborah Mooney." The ballroom froze. No one applauded. No one spoke. Paul looked at his wife in complete disbelief. He searched her face, hoping he had misunderstood. He had not. Sterling continued. "Through her family's holding company, Deborah Mooney became the controlling shareholder of Northbridge. She has remained our majority owner ever since." Several executives stared at Deborah with complete shock. Some investors exchanged confused looks. Others immediately began whispering. Paul remained motionless. He remembered every conversation they had shared about Northbridge, every opinion she had offered, every piece of thoughtful advice. He suddenly understood why she always seemed to see problems before anyone else. She had known the company better than he ever imagined. Corinne Vale stepped forward. She accepted the microphone from Sterling. "As board chair, I want to make one fact perfectly clear. Deborah Mooney never interfered with daily management. She never requested special treatment. She never influenced promotions." She looked directly toward Paul. "Every position earned inside Northbridge was based on individual performance." Paul slowly lowered his head. Everything he had achieved belonged to his own work. Deborah had protected that. She had never allowed anyone to question his integrity. Corinne continued. "Months ago, concerns began reaching the board. They involved procurement practices, employee treatment, vendor approvals, corporate governance." She looked toward Malcolm Rourke. "Because of those concerns, Deborah authorized an independent governance review." The ballroom became quiet once again. Paul slowly looked toward Deborah. She had known about the investigation. She had never mentioned it. Malcolm stepped beside Corinne, carrying the leather portfolio. He opened it carefully. Every finding inside these documents has been verified. We interviewed employees. We reviewed financial records. We examined company procedures. Everything was independently confirmed. He looked across the audience. This review was never intended to embarrass anyone. It was created to protect Northbridge and every employee who depends on it. Paul felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. He remembered every complaint he had postponed, every report he planned to review later, every warning he believed could wait. He finally understood why the board had asked so many quiet questions during recent meetings. They already knew an independent review was underway. Deborah had never warned him. She had never tried to protect him from accountability. She had trusted the process. That realization hurt even more. She had believed fairness mattered more than personal loyalty. Sterling spoke once more. Many people will remember tonight because they discovered who owns this company. I hope they remember something else. He looked toward Deborah. For 16 years, she never used her ownership to gain attention. She protected this company's future. She protected her husband's reputation. She allowed him to build his career without anyone questioning whether success came through family influence. Paul looked at Deborah with tears forming in his eyes. Every promotion, every award, every achievement, she had quietly stepped aside so every one of them would belong to him alone. The audience no longer looked at Deborah as Paul's wife. They looked at her with respect, not because she owned Northbridge, because she had carried that responsibility for 16 years without asking anyone to recognize her. The greatest surprise of the evening was no longer who controlled the company. It was discovering that the woman many people had underestimated had spent years protecting both Northbridge and the man who had failed to protect her only moments earlier. The ballroom remained silent. Everyone expected Deborah to celebrate. Many expected her to remind everyone that she owned the company. She did neither. She looked across the audience before speaking. I appreciate everything Mr. Wren, Ms. Vale, and Mr. Rourke have shared tonight. She turned toward the guests. But that isn't the reason I accepted this microphone. She looked toward Celeste. Your question wasn't the hardest part of this evening. Celeste lowered her eyes. Deborah continued calmly. I've heard people underestimate me before. I've heard people assume my life was built by someone else. I've never needed to correct them. She paused only long enough to look at Paul. The hardest moment came when I looked at my husband. Paul could not meet her eyes. I believe the man I've stood beside for 16 years would say one sentence. That's all. One sentence. She looked directly at him. I wasn't asking you to embarrass anyone. I wasn't asking you to reveal my private life. I simply hoped you would say, "That's my wife. Please treat her with respect." The words settled over the ballroom. Many people quietly lowered their heads. Deborah continued, I didn't need recognition. I needed support. She turned toward the audience. Some of you may believe tonight is about money. It isn't. Some of you may believe it's about ownership. It isn't. She gently shook her head. This is about character. She looked back at Paul. When we married, we promised to stand beside each other, not only when life was easy, but especially when someone questioned our worth. Paul felt every word. He remembered their first apartment. He remembered celebrating promotions together. He remembered every promise he had made to his family. For the first time, he understood that missing birthdays and school events had slowly weakened something much deeper. Tonight, his silence had finally exposed it. Deborah continued, I kept my ownership private for 16 years. I never wanted anyone to wonder whether Paul's success came from me. I wanted every promotion he received to belong completely to him. She looked around the ballroom. I protected his reputation because I loved him. Then she looked back at Paul. Tonight, I needed my husband to protect my dignity. He chose not to. Paul slowly stood from his chair. His voice trembled. Deborah. She looked at him. I'm sorry. I failed you. I should have stopped it the moment it started. I should have stood beside you. I didn't. I have no excuse. The ballroom listened without moving. Paul continued, I've spent years believing my greatest responsibility was growing this company. I was wrong. My greatest responsibility has always been my family. He turned toward Beth and Brad's empty seats in the audience section reserved for family members. Then he remembered they were watching from home. The realization struck him immediately. His children had seen everything. He closed his eyes. They saw me fail their mother. Deborah answered softly, They also heard you admit it. Paul nodded. I can't change what happened, but I will spend the rest of my life earning back the trust I lost tonight. Deborah did not respond immediately. She wanted everyone listening to understand something important. She turned back toward the audience. Leadership is tested long before someone enters a boardroom. It begins with how we treat people who trust us. She looked across the executives. A title cannot replace integrity. A promotion cannot replace loyalty. A successful career cannot replace a strong family. Several executives quietly reflected on their own lives. Some thought about missed dinners. Others remembered promises they had postponed because of work. Deborah continued, If the people closest to us no longer feel protected, then every professional success becomes smaller than we imagined. No one disagreed. Her words carried more weight than any award presented that evening. She handed the microphone back to Sterling. I've said everything I came here to say. Sterling accepted it with respect. Thank you, Deborah. He looked across the ballroom. For 16 years, she protected this company. Tonight, she reminded us why this company exists. It exists because people matter. He turned toward Corinne. The board will now proceed with its scheduled business. Corinne stepped forward. The governance review is complete. The board will immediately address its findings. Several executives exchanged worried looks. Celeste stood completely still. Gideon lowered his head. Neither knew what the report contained. Paul slowly returned to his seat. For the first time in many years, he no longer thought about contracts, promotions, or quarterly results. He thought only about his wife. He thought about Beth and Brad watching from home. He thought about the simple words he should have spoken when Deborah needed him most. He understood that losing respect inside his own family would hurt far more than losing any position inside Northbridge. The celebration had ended. Now accountability was about to begin. The ballroom remained quiet as Corinne Vale stepped to the microphone. The celebration has ended. We will now complete the final item on tonight's agenda. No one left their seat. Every executive understood something important was about to happen. Corinne looked across the room. Several months ago, the board of directors authorized an independent governance review. The purpose was simple: to determine whether Northbridge continued operating according to the standards upon which this company was built. She nodded toward Malcolm Rourke. Malcolm opened the leather portfolio. He removed the first report. Every conclusion presented tonight is supported by documents, interviews, financial records, and company policy. No decision has been based on rumor. No decision has been influenced by tonight's events. He looked around the ballroom. These findings were completed before this dinner began. That statement immediately changed the atmosphere. Everyone understood the investigation had nothing to do with Deborah's public revelation. The board had already reached its conclusions. Malcolm continued. The review identified repeated violations of purchasing procedures. Required approvals were bypassed. Vendor documentation was incomplete. Employee concerns were ignored. He placed several reports on the podium. Multiple employees also reported retaliation after raising legitimate workplace concerns. The audience listened carefully. Corinne spoke again. Northbridge was built on trust. When employees stop believing they can speak honestly, leadership has already failed. She turned toward Gideon Price. Gideon Price. Gideon slowly stood. The investigation confirmed repeated violations of company policy under your supervision. You failed to follow required procurement procedures. You ignored compliance requirements. You discouraged employees from reporting concerns. Gideon attempted to respond. I can explain. Corinne raised her hand. You were given every opportunity during the investigation. You were treated fairly. The evidence has been reviewed. She looked directly at him. Effective immediately, your employment with Northbridge Freight Solutions is terminated. The room remained silent. Security was unnecessary. Gideon quietly gathered his belongings and walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one spoke. Corinne continued. Celeste Arden. Celeste slowly stood. She still looked shaken by everything that had happened. Corinne spoke calmly. The investigation found repeated misuse of executive authority. You controlled access to executive communications beyond your assigned responsibilities. You failed to process employee concerns appropriately. You contributed to a workplace culture that discouraged accountability. Celeste's voice trembled. I never intended to hurt anyone. Malcolm answered. Intent does not erase responsibility. Corinne nodded. Your employment with Northbridge Freight Solutions is also terminated, effective immediately. Tears filled Celeste's eyes. She looked toward Paul. He remained seated. He offered no defense, not because he lacked compassion, because he knew the board was following documented facts. Celeste quietly walked out of the ballroom. The doors closed behind her. Corinne continued. Our review also examined executive oversight. She looked directly at Paul. Paul Adelstein. Paul stood immediately. His face showed no surprise. He already understood what was coming. Corinne spoke with the same calm tone she had used throughout the evening. The investigation found no evidence that you personally committed fraud. No evidence that you received improper financial benefit. No evidence that you intentionally violated company policy. Several executives looked relieved. Corinne continued. However, as a senior executive, you repeatedly received reports that required leadership attention. You postponed action. You failed to ensure employee concerns received timely review. You allowed problems to continue under your authority. Paul nodded. That's true. I did. Corinne appreciated his honesty. Leadership is measured not only by what a person does. It is also measured by what a person allows to continue. Paul lowered his head. I understand. Sterling Wren stepped forward. I hired Paul because I believed he had integrity. I still believe that. But integrity also requires accountability. He looked directly at Paul. Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave, pending completion of executive leadership review and ethics counseling. Paul answered immediately. I accept the board's decision. I won't argue. I should have acted sooner. Sterling nodded. Your cooperation will be taken into consideration. Paul quietly returned to his seat. He felt no anger toward the board. Every decision had been supported by evidence. Everything had been handled fairly. Deborah watched without saying a word. She had never asked the board to protect Paul. She had never asked them to punish him. She wanted only one thing, the truth. That truth had now reached everyone inside the ballroom. Corinne looked across the audience one final time. Tonight has reminded us that no title places anyone above accountability. Not an executive. Not management. Not ownership. She briefly looked toward Deborah. Our company will move forward because every decision will continue to follow facts instead of emotion. The audience slowly rose to its feet. There was no celebration, no applause, only quiet respect for a company that had chosen integrity over convenience. As guests began leaving the ballroom, Paul remained seated for a moment. His career had changed in a single evening. What troubled him most was not losing his position. It was realizing that the people waiting for him at home had watched him lose something far more valuable than a title. Chuang Ti Ding Duan. Paul left the hotel alone. He drove home without turning on the radio. For the first time in years, work was no longer on his mind. He thought only about Deborah. He thought about Beth. He thought about Brad. Most of all, he thought about the 3 words he should never have spoken. Let's move on. When he pulled into the driveway, every light inside the house was still on. He sat in the car for a moment. Then he walked to the front door. Before he could reach for the handle, The door opened. Deborah stood there. Neither of them spoke. She stepped aside. Paul quietly walked inside. Beth and Brad were waiting in the living room. The television was off. No one smiled. Paul looked at his children. "I know you watched everything." Beth answered first. "We did." Paul nodded. "I wish you hadn't." Beth looked directly at him. "I wish we hadn't needed to." Her words hurt more than anything said at the hotel. Paul sat down across from them. "I owe all of you an apology." Brad looked at him. "Dad, why didn't you defend Mom?" Paul lowered his head. "I was thinking about the room. I was thinking about the company. I was thinking about avoiding a scene." Brad frowned. "But Mom was standing there." Paul nodded slowly. "I know, and I failed her." Beth spoke next. "You always taught us to stand up for people. You told us never to stay quiet when someone was being treated unfairly." Paul looked at his daughter. "I remember. So why didn't you do it?" Paul had no excuse. "I was afraid." Beth looked surprised. "Afraid of what?" "I thought if I challenged Celeste in front of everyone, the evening would fall apart." Beth answered quietly. "It fell apart anyway." Paul could not argue. She was right. Brad looked at his father. "If somebody talked to Mom like that at my school, I would have said something." Paul felt his chest tighten. "You should have." Brad continued. "You always tell me courage means doing the right thing." Paul nodded. "It does." Brad asked one final question. "So, why didn't you?" Paul looked at both of his children. "Because I forgot something important. I forgot that protecting my family mattered more than protecting a company event." Silence filled the room for only a brief moment as everyone absorbed his words. Deborah remained standing nearby. She had allowed the children to ask every question without interrupting. Paul turned toward her. "I've apologized at the hotel. I'm apologizing again. But I know words aren't enough." Deborah answered honestly, "No, they aren't." Paul accepted that. "I understand." Beth walked toward her mother. She gently held Deborah's hand. When Celeste asked that question, I kept waiting for Dad." "So did I," Brad said. "I thought he would stop her." Paul closed his eyes. "I kept waiting too. I knew what I should do. I just didn't do it." Beth shook her head. "I've never seen Mom standing alone before." "Neither have I," Brad added. Paul looked at his wife. "You were never alone. I made you feel that way. I'm deeply sorry." Deborah finally sat across from him. "Paul, I never needed people to know I owned Northbridge. I never wanted applause. I only wanted my husband beside me." Paul nodded. "I understand now." She looked directly at him. "I hope you do. Because tonight wasn't only about one sentence. It was about years of small choices." Paul listened carefully. "You missed birthdays. You missed games. You missed school events. I accepted all of that because I believed your work mattered." She continued, "But tonight was different. Tonight I needed you. You were there, but you still weren't beside me." Paul wiped his eyes. "I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Deborah answered calmly, "I don't want you living with regret. I want you to live differently." Those words stayed with him. They were not spoken with anger. They were spoken with hope. Paul looked toward Beth and Brad. "I know I can't change tonight, but I want to change tomorrow." Beth asked quietly, "Will you really?" Paul answered immediately, "Yes." Brad looked at him. "Even if you don't get your job back?" Paul did not hesitate. "My job isn't the most important thing anymore. My family is." Brad slowly nodded. For the first time that night, he believed his father meant what he said. Deborah stood. "It's late. The children have school tomorrow." Beth hugged her mother. Brad hugged both parents before walking upstairs. Paul watched them leave. The house became quiet. He looked around the living room. Family photographs covered the shelves. Birthday pictures, vacation memories, baseball trophies, school awards. Everything he had worked so hard to provide was right in front of him. Yet he finally understood something he had missed for years. His family had never asked him to give them a bigger house. They had never asked for expensive gifts. They had never measured his love by his salary or his title. They had only wanted his time and his presence. Paul looked at Deborah one more time. "I've spent years trying to build a successful career." She nodded. "I know." He took a deep breath. "Now I need to rebuild something far more important." Deborah looked at him calmly. "Then start tomorrow." Paul answered without hesitation. "I will." Chuang Ti Ding Duan. The next morning, Paul woke before sunrise. For years, that hour meant checking emails and preparing for meetings. This morning was different. His work phone was silent. His calendar was empty. His administrative leave had already begun. He walked into the kitchen. Deborah was preparing breakfast. She looked at him. "Good morning." "Good morning." There was no argument. There was no pretending everything was normal. They simply faced a new reality together. A few minutes later, Beth and Brad came downstairs. Paul smiled. "I'll drive you both to school today." Brad looked surprised. "Really?" Paul nodded. "I've missed too many mornings." Beth quietly picked up her backpack. The drive to school was different from years before. Instead of checking his phone at every traffic light, Paul listened. Brad talked about baseball practice. Beth talked about a history project. Paul paid attention to every word. When they arrived, Brad smiled. "Thanks for bringing us." Paul smiled back. "I'll be here after school, too." Brad nodded before walking inside. Beth remained beside the car for a moment. "I hope you keep doing this." "I will." She believed him enough to smile before joining her classmates. Paul watched both children disappear into the building. Then he drove to Northbridge's Executive Development Center. Before leaving the company, Corinne had given him one instruction. "Your leadership review begins with executive ethics counseling." Paul accepted without complaint. He entered the building and met with the leadership development team assigned by the board. The session lasted several hours. They reviewed executive responsibility, decision-making, workplace accountability. The duty leaders have to employees. The duty leaders have to speak when something is wrong. Paul answered every question honestly. When asked about the dinner, he did not blame Celeste. He did not blame pressure. He blamed himself. "I knew what the right response was. I chose the easier response. That choice hurt my family." The counselors encouraged him to focus on actions instead of promises. One of the first assignments was simple: rebuild trust through consistent behavior. Paul accepted it immediately. When he returned home that afternoon, Brad was already waiting outside. "You came. I told you I would." Paul stayed for baseball practice from beginning to end. He cheered every good play. He encouraged every mistake. When practice ended, Brad ran toward him with a smile Paul had not seen in a long time. "You really stayed." "I said I would." That evening, the family ate dinner together. No phone interrupted the meal. No business call pulled Paul away. After dinner, Beth placed her school project on the dining table. "Dad, can I show you something?" "I'd love to see it." She spent nearly 20 minutes explaining every detail. Paul listened without looking away. When she finished, he smiled. "You worked very hard." Beth laughed. "You actually listened." "I should have done that a long time ago." Later that night, after Beth and Brad went upstairs, Paul and Deborah sat together in the living room. Neither wanted another emotional speech. They wanted honesty. Paul looked at her. "I don't expect forgiveness." Deborah nodded. "You shouldn't." "I've apologized many times." "I know, but apologies don't rebuild trust." She looked directly at him. "Trust grows when people see change." Paul agreed. "I'm beginning to understand that." Deborah continued. "I don't need grand promises. I don't need expensive gifts. I don't need dramatic gestures. I need consistency. When you say you'll be somewhere, be there." When you promise time with the children, keep your promise. When someone is treated unfairly, speak. Paul listened carefully. Every sentence was simple. Every sentence was clear. I can do that, Deborah answered honestly. I hope so. She wasn't refusing to trust him. She simply refused to pretend trust had already returned. Paul respected that. Over the following weeks, he continued attending every ethics counseling session required by the board. He completed every assignment. He never missed a meeting. At home, he followed the same approach. He drove the children to school. He attended Brad's baseball games. He helped Beth prepare for presentations. He spent evenings at the dinner table instead of answering work emails. Nothing changed overnight. Beth slowly became more comfortable talking with him again. Brad stopped wondering whether his father would show up. Deborah noticed every effort. She also noticed that Paul no longer talked about promotions. He no longer measured success by awards or executive titles. One evening, he looked across the dinner table at his family. This is where I should have invested my best time all along. Deborah smiled gently. No speech could have convinced her. His actions were beginning to. The road ahead would still take time. Broken trust could not be repaired in a few weeks. Paul accepted that without complaint. For the first time in many years, he understood that rebuilding a family required the same commitment he had once given only to his career. That decision became the first real step toward earning back the respect of the people who had never stopped loving him. Chuang Ti Ding Duan. 6 months passed. Life inside the Mooney Adelstein home looked different. Not because of one emotional conversation, because of hundreds of small choices. Every weekday morning, Paul joined his family at the breakfast table. His phone stayed in another room. Beth noticed it first. You don't even check your emails anymore. Paul smiled. They can wait. Brad laughed. I like this version of Dad. So do I, Paul replied. The children smiled. It was no longer unusual to see him at home. It had become normal. Every afternoon, Paul arrived at school before dismissal. Some days he drove Beth home. Other days, he took Brad directly to baseball practice. He never asked whether he had enough time. He made time. One afternoon, Brad looked toward the parking lot after practice. Paul was already there. Brad ran over with a smile. You came early. I wanted to watch warm-ups too. Brad grinned. You never watched warm-ups before. I missed too many. I won't miss them again. Brad believed him, not because of the promise, because Paul had already kept many others. Beth also noticed the difference. Whenever she had a presentation or school activity, Paul arrived before the program started. He sat beside Deborah. He applauded every achievement. After one event, Beth walked toward her parents. I kept looking for you. Paul smiled. And? You were already there. She hugged him. That felt good. Paul hugged her back. It felt good for me too. At home, family dinners became part of everyday life again. No one rushed through the meal. No phone interrupted the conversation. Brad shared stories about baseball. Beth talked about school. Deborah enjoyed seeing everyone together again. One evening, Brad looked around the table. This reminds me of when I was little. Paul looked at him. I'm sorry you had to miss so many dinners with me. Brad shrugged. You're here now. Paul smiled. I plan to stay here. Deborah noticed something else. Paul no longer spoke about promotions. He no longer measured success by his position. Instead, he asked simple questions. How was your day? What can I help with? What are we doing this weekend? Those questions slowly rebuilt trust. At Northbridge, change was also becoming visible. The board introduced stronger approval procedures. Every purchasing decision required complete documentation. Employees could report concerns directly to independent compliance officers. Every complaint received a written response. Managers completed leadership training before supervising larger teams. The goal was clear. No employee should ever feel ignored again. Morale improved. Employees became more willing to speak honestly. Departments worked together more effectively. Sterling Wren visited several offices during the following months. He noticed something he had not seen for a long time. People smiled more. Conversations became open. Trust slowly returned. Corinne Vale reviewed the first governance report after the reforms. Employee confidence had improved. Policy compliance had improved. Reporting transparency had improved. She smiled. This is the company we wanted to protect. Malcolm Rourke agreed. Accountability is producing results. Meanwhile, Paul remained on administrative leave. He accepted every requirement without complaint. He completed every leadership assignment requested by the board. He never asked for special treatment. He knew respect could not be requested. It had to be earned again. One Saturday morning, the family gathered in the backyard. Brad practiced pitching. Beth kept score for fun. Deborah sat nearby with a cup of coffee. Paul caught every throw. Brad finally struck the glove with a perfect fastball. "Did you see that?" Paul laughed. "I sure did. I've been practicing." "It shows." Brad smiled proudly. Months earlier, he would have looked toward an empty chair. Now his father stood beside him. Deborah watched quietly. She remembered all the promises Paul had made over the years. The difference now was simple. He no longer made promises. He simply showed up. That was rebuilding their family one ordinary day at a time. Several months after the Leadership Appreciation Dinner, Northbridge Freight Solutions held its first board meeting under the company's new leadership structure. The atmosphere was different. Meetings focused on accountability instead of appearances. Questions received direct answers. Every major decision followed the company's updated governance policies. Corinne Vale opened the meeting. Today's agenda begins with executive leadership. She looked toward the board. Northbridge needs leaders who earn trust every day. The board members agreed. Sterling Wren stood. For many years, this company grew because people believed in one another. We lost part of that culture. Today, we begin restoring it. He looked toward Nadine Mercer. The board has unanimously approved Nadine Mercer as Chief Executive Officer of Northbridge Freight Solutions. The room filled with respectful applause. Nadine stood. "Thank you for your confidence. I accept this responsibility with humility. My commitment is simple. We will lead with honesty. We will protect our employees. We will never ignore concerns. We will earn trust every single day." The board approved the appointment. Northbridge officially entered a new chapter. Over the following weeks, Nadine met employees across every department. She listened more than she spoke. Workers shared ideas openly. Managers discussed challenges without fear. Employees noticed the difference immediately. For the first time in years, many believed their voices truly mattered. Corinne reviewed the first company-wide employee survey under the new leadership. Confidence had risen again. Communication had improved. Employees trusted management more than they had in years. Sterling smiled as he read the report. This is the Northbridge we worked so hard to protect. Meanwhile, reporters continued asking questions about the woman who had quietly owned the company for 16 years. News outlets requested interviews. Business magazines wanted exclusive stories. Several organizations invited Deborah to speak about leadership. She declined every invitation. She thanked each organization politely. Then she returned to her normal life. One afternoon, Sterling visited her home. They sat on the back porch while Brad practiced baseball in the yard. Beth was finishing homework nearby. Sterling smiled. "The business world wants to hear your story." Deborah smiled back. "My story isn't the important part. You saved this company. I invested in people. That's different." Sterling nodded. "You've earned public recognition." Deborah shook her head gently. "I never made that investment for recognition. I made it because I believed the company deserved another chance. And I still believe that." Sterling respected her answer. "I thought you might say that." He stood to leave. "The board appreciates everything you've done." Deborah smiled. "The best thank you is seeing the company succeed." Sterling left knowing she would never seek attention for herself. That was exactly why he respected her so deeply. At home, nothing about Deborah changed. She still volunteered at the community learning center. She still prepared family dinners. She still encouraged Beth before school projects. She still cheered for Brad during baseball games. Owning Northbridge had never defined her. Her family always came first. One evening, Paul found her organizing papers at the dining table. "I've been thinking." She looked up. "About what?" "You could have taken over the company yourself." "I could have." "You never wanted that?" Deborah smiled. "I've always believed leadership isn't about sitting in the biggest office. It's about helping people succeed." Paul nodded slowly. "I understand that now." She looked at him. "I hoped you would." A few weeks later, Paul received a letter from the board. His leadership review had been completed. The board recognized his full cooperation. They also recognized the changes he had made during his administrative leave. Paul accepted the board's decision with gratitude. His focus was no longer on climbing another corporate ladder. His focus remained on becoming the husband and father his family deserved. Northbridge continued growing under Nadine's leadership. Employees trusted the company again. The board remained committed to transparency. Every leader understood that titles brought responsibility, not privilege. Deborah watched those changes with quiet satisfaction. She had never wanted control over people's lives. She only wanted the company to remain faithful to the values that saved it 16 years earlier. Those values were finally guiding Northbridge once again. Chuang Ti Ding Duan. A full year passed after the leadership appreciation dinner. Looking at the Mooney Edelstein family, most people would never guess how close they had come to losing what mattered most. Not because the past had been forgotten, because every day after that, dinner had been lived differently. Paul no longer measured his life by promotions. He measured it by the moments he almost missed. Every morning, he shared breakfast with his family. Every afternoon, he knew where Beth and Brad needed him. Every evening, he sat at the dinner table instead of answering work calls. Those ordinary moments became the most valuable part of his day. One Saturday morning, Brad played in the biggest baseball game of the season. Months earlier, he would have looked into the crowd hoping his father might arrive before the final inning. This time, Paul was already there before warm-ups began. He helped Brad carry his equipment. He watched every pitch. He celebrated every good play. When the game ended, Brad ran straight toward him. "Dad, did you see my last hit?" Paul laughed. "I saw every one of them." Brad smiled proudly. "I'm glad. You've never missed a game in a long time." Paul placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I don't plan to miss another one." Brad believed him completely. That trust had returned because Paul earned it one day at a time. A few weeks later, Beth graduated with academic honors. Families filled the school auditorium. When Beth walked across the stage, she immediately found her parents in the front row. Paul stood first. He applauded with all his strength. Deborah smiled proudly beside him. After the ceremony, Beth hugged both of them. "I didn't have to look around today." Paul smiled. "Why?" "Because I already knew exactly where you would be." Those words meant more than any executive award Paul had ever received. On the drive home, Beth looked at her father. "You've changed." Paul nodded. "I had to." "I'm glad you did." That simple conversation stayed with him for the rest of the day. At Northbridge Freight Solutions, the company continued moving forward. Employees trusted leadership again. Managers understood that responsibility came before authority. Questions were welcomed. Concerns were addressed. The company became stronger because people no longer feared speaking honestly. Sterling Wren announced his retirement later that year. Before leaving, he addressed employees one final time. A successful company is never built by one person. It is built by people who protect one another. He thanked the employees. He thanked the board. Finally, he looked toward Deborah. "You reminded all of us that leadership begins with character." The audience applauded. Deborah accepted the recognition with her usual humility. She never considered herself more important than anyone else. She simply believed every person deserved respect. That belief had guided every decision she made. One evening, the family gathered on the back porch after dinner. Brad tossed a baseball into the air. Beth talked about her plans for the future. Deborah smiled as she listened. Paul looked around quietly. This was the life he had almost lost. Not because another man had taken it, Not because money disappeared. He had almost lost it because he stopped protecting the people who loved him most. He turned toward Deborah. "Thank you." She smiled. "For what?" "For giving me the chance to become a better husband." She reached across the table and held his hand. "You chose to become one." Paul nodded. "I'll keep choosing it." She believed him, not because of his words, because his actions had matched them for an entire year. That made all the difference. As the evening came to an end, Paul looked at Beth and Brad laughing together. He realized something he wished he had understood years earlier. Success is not measured by the office where you work. It is measured by the people who are happy to see you walk through your front door. A title may earn applause. Money may bring comfort. Recognition may fill a room. But none of those things can replace the respect of your family. None of them can replace being present when the people you love need you most. Deborah never became great because she owned Northbridge Freight Solutions. She became great because she never allowed power to change her values. Paul never regained his family's respect because he returned to an executive position. He regained it because he chose honesty over excuses, responsibility over pride, and family over status every single day. That became the lesson everyone remembered. The company recovered. The family healed. The careers continued. But the greatest victory had nothing to do with business. It came from one husband learning that real leadership begins at home, and that no achievement is worth the price of losing the dignity of the people waiting for you there. Chuang ti di duan, chuang ti di duan, chuang ti di duan, chuang ti di duan.
Thank you for staying with Real Unright Stories. Until next time, stay safe, my amazing family.